The best year of my life. Well, that title might seem ironic for those who know about my journey, but I'd like to clue you in. The big takeaway, spoiler alert, none of us are getting out of this alive. And you could really benefit from embracing life, spending time with the folks you care about, doing what you love. There it is, the last page of the text. So if you already understand this concept, you should feel free to leave and get on with life. But if you need a little more convincing, let me share some of the details that really made this the best year of my life. As I write this, I'm approaching the year anniversary of my stage 4 diagnosis of colon cancer with the BRAF mutation that seriously reduces my survival timeline, even with the most aggressive chemotherapies. I know what you're thinking, WTF, she's got cancer, she's terminal, and it's the best year of her life? Still dubious? Listen up. It all started when my general practitioner insisted that I drop some weight and get my cholesterol down in November of 2020. I've been working out at Orange Theory Fitness, from now on referenced as OTF. But I was also stopping at Bojangles after my morning workout as a reward. Well, that calorie swap was not really working. So I got serious with Weight Watchers and upped my walking with Jasper. That's my Havanese. And his name is quite fitting. He really is a rascal, but he loves his mama and he never leaves my side. Unless, of course, he's going with his Uncle T to Chick-fil-A for nuggets and mac and cheese. Now, don't judge. He maintains his bloodthirsty liberal attitude just like his mom. He's just addicted to the attention he gets from the drive-through staff. But back to the timeline. I worked really hard and I lost 30 pounds in 3 months. Little did I know the Weight Watchers was getting an assist from the colon cancer that ultimately was developing a 7-centimeter tumor in my descending colon. After a fabulous beach trip in early December, my husband Chris and I basically relocated to Fayetteville to help care for my 98-year-old mom who was becoming weak with pneumonia. We had help from her regular caregiver 4 days a week, but it was a pretty stressful time. The day I finally convinced her to go to her physician, I also tossed her out of her wheelchair on our exit onto the asphalt. Sort of a throw mama from the train moment. She was bruised and her glasses were broken, but fortunately that was all. The guilt I felt about that accident lingered far longer than her bruises. And 2 days later, she ended up in the hospital with pneumonia and low sodium. They also determined that she had COVID. So I quarantined in Fayetteville and Chris returned to Raleigh. And the 2 weeks in her isolation on the COVID floor at the peak of the pandemic were some of the worst days I remember. Oh, yeah, and throw in the insurrection of January 6th, and you pretty much have a shit show. Well, after numerous conversations with the attending physician at the hospital who wanted to move her to rehab, I lucked up with a different physician on the day of her discharge, which also happened to be my birthday. And I simply begged him to let her come home. She had already told me multiple times she just wanted to die. The conditions in the hospital were pretty wretched. So I said, if this is the end, can't we just do it at home? He said, it might kill you. Huh, little did we know. But more on that later. The EMTs delivered her to her recliner, and my caretaking adventure ramped up as she was so weak I had to lift her for everything. Not sure what I would have done without Amazon Prime, who delivered a potty shower chair. That was a godsend. Thank goodness OT and PT came and started working with her, and miraculously, in a few weeks, she got strong enough to navigate on her own. It's a good thing, too, because the pain in my gut was becoming unbearable and I was turning into a real bitch. So I went to the doc and she sent me for an x-ray where they found a blockage. She said liquid diet for the weekend, and I thought, excellent, egg drop soup and red wine sounds good to me. Unfortunately, that didn't do anything. She had already ordered an MRI, but we were waiting on insurance approval. So 3 weeks later, I called and asked for a telemedicine appointment, and she said, you look terrible. I'm ordering an emergency MRI today. So I drove myself to Nightdale, hoping I just had diverticulitis. And on the drive home, she called and said, I really hate to tell you this over the phone, but I know you would want to know as soon as possible. You have a 7-centimeter tumor on your descending colon, and it has metastasized into the peritoneal cavity. So I've scheduled an appointment with the surgeon and the oncologist. It was March 4th, 2021, the day I learned I had cancer. It's a day that will live in infamy, just like the day Kennedy was shot, or the Challenger blew up, or 9/11 occurred. You never forget exactly where you were when you first learned you have cancer. My physician prescribed tramadol for pain and lorazepam for sleep while we were waiting for surgery on the 23rd of March. And I kept going to OTF and walking Jasper like I was the Energizer Bunny. Gave me a sense of normalcy. But truth be told, I was getting weaker every day, and the surgeon couldn't believe I wasn't already in the hospital considering my numbers. Clearly, he didn't know me. I had shit to do. But after another CT scan and MRI, they discovered I had a blood clot in my left clavicle because clearly I just couldn't be satisfied with tumor. So they sent me to ultrasound and admitted me to the hospital immediately, where they put me on intravenous nutrition and a drain for the abscess that had developed around my tumor. I told my friends they could probably smell the drain in Cleveland. It was pretty awful. Fast forward to surgery, which went really very well, but the aftermath was another point of humor. I was instructed to drink a lot of water, and I complied. And then they said I had to get up and walk, and I said, that's going to be tough, but I'll try. So I swung my legs over the side of the bed and tried to stand. The 2 nurses in the room stepped back instead of holding on to me, and I said, I'm really woozy, and I'm going down. Fortunately, Chris was there to keep my head from banging onto the bed rail. And then I requested something in which to toss all the water I had just consumed. I grabbed a 20-ounce cup and started to hurl. And then the nurse picked up the big trash can. I'm talking 4 feet high and 2 feet wide. And I said, really? Fortunately, another nurse brought me a smaller trash can and I hugged it for dear life. So, we met with the oncologist, and the first thing he asked was, what do you do? I told him both Chris and I were educators, and I'm in the arts, and Chris is in career technical education. Why do you ask? He said, well, he explains things differently to engineers than to folks in the humanities. At that point, I knew we were a great match. As he explained my situation, he said 59 of the 64 lymph glands we tested were positive for cancer. So you're high risk, stage 3, but it's curative. We'll give you 8 chemo sessions and you should be good. Except, dun dun dun, we have to test your tumor for mutations. So there's the one that's kind of bad, and then there's the one that's really bad. Guess what? After a few weeks, the results came back and my tumor showed up to be the worst kind, BRAF, that has a really short timeline. The doctor said, so now you're stage 4 and we need to be more aggressive with the chemo. And by the way, if there are things you want to do, like go to New York and see shows, because I know all you theater people are alike, you should plan to travel. Keep working out, eat whatever you want. Spend time with people you care about, and do the things you love. Let me reiterate that because that's really the most important message you can take away. Travel, exercise, eat what you want, and spend time with people you care about, doing the things you love. Then he asked me a most curious question. At least I thought so at the time. He said, "Do you want to know what would happen if you don't take any treatment?" And I said, "Not really." And he responded with, "Well, people are going to ask you, and you need to be able to say that we had the conversation." I said, "Okay." He said, "Without treatment, you've got 4 months. The first 2 weeks, you'll feel pretty good because we've gotten rid of the tumor, but it will go downhill pretty quickly from there." So I leaned forward and clapped my hands and said, "Well, then let's get this party started." And so it began. As soon as my port was placed, I started with infusion of Folfox and oxaliplatin and irinotecan, which basically took 4 hours every 2 weeks. And I left with a pump that continued to deliver the chemo for 46 hours. So I was immediately transported back to the 90s with a fanny pack that buzzed every 2 minutes. Blood work numbers indicated that my body was responding really well to the chemo. The doc said it was a combination of the right chemo cocktail, though frankly I would have preferred a Cosmo to the metallic taste of the oxaliplatin. And he attributed it to all my exercise and my positive attitude. But he knows I'm a pragmatist. And he always ends each session with, "We're getting the results that we expect and they're great, but this doesn't change the long-term prognosis." And I always respond with, "I get it." So early on, I was doing laps in the house with the rollator. Then I'd venture outside, but I had to stop and sit a lot because the surgery had done a number on my core. At that point, my 98-year-old mom could have beaten me in a rollator race. But just like the determination and perseverance that she demonstrated in her recovery from COVID, I fought back. I kept moving. And eventually, I was able to return to OTF and walking with Jasper without the rollator. Well, about 4 chemo sessions in, my port got infected and I ended up in the ER. Clearly, I was committed to being all in for this adventure. So, Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong will. I was admitted in the middle of the night and noticed NPO on my whiteboard. Well, that would have been okay until the nurse said, "You have to take this doxycycline with a few sips of water." I said, "Well, I can do the few sips, but I gotta have something on my stomach or it's not gonna be pretty." We debated. I asked for a few saltine crackers and she knuckled. A few minutes later, she came in and asked, "When was your last dose of Eliquis?" Remember the blood clot. And I said 9 p.m. She laughed out loud and said, "Hey, you're not having surgery tomorrow. We're taking the NPO status off." And she enthusiastically erased that board. Next morning, the doctors started their rounds and explained that I'd be in the hospital for at least 3 days to get my clotting under control. But then another hero stopped by. He was in the same practice as my surgeon, and he said, "Look, I'm not worried about your bleeding. You're really healthy. Well, aside from the cancer. And I can remove that port tomorrow morning." Almost in a name that tune kind of rhythm. I decided he was even more cool when he gave me the surgery options. He said, "We can schedule the OR for 7 a.m. and you'll need to be NPO from midnight on. Of course, on Sunday mornings, you never know what could happen and your surgery could be delayed. Or I can remove it right here in the hospital room under a local anesthetic, and you can eat and drink right up until I walk in the door to do the procedure." Well, of course, I chose the latter. But that was no picnic either, because he popped that syringe of what was basically Novocaine and then started to dig it out. Whew, I still remember thinking, my dad was a dentist. He would have waited just a tad for the Novocaine to take effect. But in a few minutes, I was being discharged and glad to be on my way home. So I had a few weeks off for my chest to heal so they could insert another port. And basically, I've been surgery free for a while, which has allowed me to follow my oncologist orders to travel. I started making a list, a trip to the West Coast with my dear friend Christine to see the Golden Gate Bridge, which was lovely and of course fog-laden, and a visit to our winery friends in Napa Valley and Paso Robles. There were 2 trips to New York City, the first with Chris, Christine, and my longtime college buddy Bill Brown, where we got to see Moulin Rouge, a visual spectacle. Come From Away, the musical that gives you hope for humanity, and American Utopia. It's basically a David Byrne party. I was on a theater high when I asked my travel companions to take the A train up to Harlem to see Swing Low, a Harriet Tubman sculpture. As we stepped out at the 125th Street station, I could sense the sculpture pulling me down the street. You see, I've used a poster-size image of Alison Saar's sculpture in several workshops with teachers all across the country. But to see this work more than 20 feet tall in person was truly breathtaking. When I placed my hand on her skirt, I was overwhelmed with emotion, feeling the power of this woman who saved so many lives. In my classes and workshops, I've also taught Kelly Starling Lyon's book, Dream Builder, the story of architect Philip Freelon, who recently passed from ALS. So, to add to my bucket list, I searched for tickets to see his design of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American Culture and History. When I lucked up on 4 tickets, we asked another couple to join us in DC, and we decided to stay at a boutique hotel in Georgetown. I love the architecture of DC, and the museum design was stellar. But the content of the museum was tough. Just like the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, it's difficult to face the horrors of humanity. I so wish we could learn from the past. My heart did lighten as we moved to the top floor where entertainment icons are celebrated, including my dear friend and mentor, Papa Chuck Davis. The second time we went to New York, we got to see Andrea Bocelli at the Madison Square Garden. And then we were seated at Radio City Music Hall to see the Rockettes when they canceled the show and the rest of their season. Thanks, COVID. But that's okay because we ended up at the St. Regis for champagne and small plates. So we moved through the fall with great results, and my oncologist decided to back off the most traumatic chemo, and he told me I was going to have a great holiday season with about 4 months of no disease progression. He was right. The holidays were wonderful, and I was free of the pump, just taking pills to cover the basic chemo. I really haven't had that much pain through this whole adventure, but I told my oncologist that I was very judicious with the tramadol, only taking half a dose at night when I absolutely couldn't sleep because of the discomfort. You see, I was concerned because it was a narcotic. He paused and said, not mockingly, take a whole dose. It's not like it has any street value. Can you see why he's such a good fit for me? He's an OTFer, a runner, a foodie, and a fan of good wine. Lots of our appointments have been spent sharing our OTF accomplishments and identifying great places to eat in various locations. But he also takes the time to explain his recommendations, and he consistently assesses my situation with questions and observations. He's pragmatic and I trust him. I know he's got my best interest as his priority. You know, people traveled from all over the country to visit with me to tell me what a difference I made in their lives. Flying or driving thousands of miles just to share face-to-face time. In addition to choreographing Young Frankenstein and designing lights for a few area productions, I've continued to teach at Meredith College and conduct online workshops. So I really am living my best life. Back in my arts administration days of the Wake County Schools, I produced lots of district-wide performances. Things like Les Mis and Aida, and one that nearly cost me my job. So when a former student orchestrated a Zoom meeting with my chorus line kids, it was bittersweet, but so powerful, because those young 30-somethings told me that I created a safe space for them to discover themselves and their love of the arts. Cards and handmade quilts and jewelry, as well as meals with friends, are all cherished. But now for a bird walk. At my last physical with my general practitioner, she noticed my cholesterol was back up, and she reminded me it was time for a pap smear. I looked up and smiled behind my mask. She paused and said, "You know what? We've got a window on that pap smear, so let's forgo that for now. And by the way, eat whatever the hell you want." Gotta love that realistic perspective. A few years ago, I started jogging and I completed 5 half marathons before I got sick. Just before the pandemic, I had run the Tiger 10K in Baton Rouge, and because of turf maintenance, we were not able to cross the usual finish line in Tiger Stadium. Terminal patients are encouraged to live their best days, and I told my oncologist that would mean teaching, doing art, and exercising. I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to jog again, but my amazing husband Chris was willing to take a 21-hour train ride in a 4x6 sleeper car from Greensboro to Louisiana to run the Tiger 5K with me. I slept on the top bunk and loved it, but Chris wasn't a big fan of the sway. So I cashed in some frequent flyer points and we returned first class thanks to American Airlines. But on a cool Sunday morning in December, we met up with some Baton Rouge friends and took off for a run walk around LSU's campus. As I finished that run on the 50-yard line of Tiger Stadium, I pumped my fist like Rocky Balboa and burst into tears. I always lose it after a run. I suppose it's a combination of adrenaline and endorphins, but this time was especially poignant. Realizing it was my first run after getting sick, and knowing it might be my last. But I'm not sad. I've been on a personal retreat in Asheville to write notes to folks to try to articulate what they've meant to me. We celebrated Valentine's at the beach with our friends of 27 years. We've seen Broadway tours at DPAC in Durham and Tanger Center in Greensboro, including a tour of Come From Away, starring a former student. Can you tell I'm obsessed with feel-good moments? I've had amazing exercise support at OTF with my squad consisting of local friends and out-of-towners. And I fully believe in one of their hashtags, more life. In all of this, I really haven't talked enough about my support system. My family and friends have really been there for me, visiting when I felt like it and sending me positive vibes when I needed to be alone. I've worried a lot about those closest to me, what will happen to them once I make the transition. But I'm comforted to know that they'll be there for each other. Early on in this adventure, Chris and I were talking and I said, "I'm just so sorry we won't have more time together." And in his typically calm voice with lots of tender strength, he simply said, "Whatever time we have will be the right amount." And then he punched me lightly in the arm and said, "Team Droessler." I never deserved him, but I'm always grateful for his love. More adventures included a virtual trip to Italy hosted by one of the greatest tour guides around, and a holiday decorating party that created the best Christmas tree ever. We've played pool with the fellow that got me hooked on billiards. Now, our shooting wasn't stellar, but the stories and laughter were energizing, and it's something that we've all needed since the shutdown of the pandemic. All of that with multiple times of seeing Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, starring one of those chorus line kids. Plenty of Hallmark movies, and lots of walks with my sweetheart and Jasper. All of those have been completely self-indulgent. So, remember the big takeaway? Spend your time doing things you love with the people that matter. This is especially important as I see the world going to hell in a handbasket. I'm sickened by the hatred and ignorance that has been unleashed. And in thinking about my shortened timeline, sometimes I think God is blessing me with an early exit strategy. I've known that my disease was probably progressing as my CEA numbers, the cancer marker in your bloodstream, has gone from 3, where the normal range is 0 to 5, at the end of October, to 50 at the end of January. And with each new blood work, that number's going up. Most recently, it was at 81. So I was expecting a pretty serious conversation with Dr. Bowles. His first question was, well, what'd you think of that CT scan report? Because I know you have read it. And I said, not great, but I decided to wait and hear details from you, since it all reads like stereo instructions to me. And I know you'll share the plan for whatever the next steps are. He smiled and responded with, there are lots of dramatic words: progression, serious, metastatic. But I'm not out of tools in my arsenal yet. And I want to focus on a few targeted areas. For example, the kidney that's being inhibited by lymph swelling. Basically, he's moving me to a clinical trial that will likely increase my time frame. Pills every day and a short infusion of a growth inhibitor every 2 weeks sounds like a great plan to me. I'm not going to miss the 4 hours of infusion and the 46 hours of the pump or the metallic taste. There are certainly side effects, but I shared that if he could help me finish the semester and teach first session summer school at Meredith, I would feel really fulfilled. He said, absolutely. We had a great conversation, and I told him that as I scan the photos on my phone, I am thrilled to share that this has truly been the best year of my life. I attributed that to his professional practice and expertise, as well as an amazing support system with lots of adventures, thoughts, and prayers from family and friends, and a ton of exercise. Friends have been generous sharing books of motivation and support. I really latched onto the writings of Kate Bowler. She's a Duke University divinity professor who also has stage 4 colon cancer. She's real. She suffers no fools. And I love her titles like Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Told Myself. Or No Cure for Being Human and Other Truths I Need to Hear. But her latest one has really resonated with me. It's especially as a theater artist, because it's just entitled Good Enough. 40-ish devotionals for a life of imperfection. So what have we learned, friends? I've been blessed with the awareness that my timeline is short. I could still be taken out by the Mario Andrettis who race down my street as I cross to visit a neighbor. But as a very wise friend said to me, there's no expiration date stamped on your rear end. So, I'm embracing every moment as deeply as I can. In the words of Dr. Steve Maraboli, I would ask you to do the same. Live your truth. Express your love. Share your enthusiasm. Take action towards your dreams. Walk your talk. Dance and sing to your music. Embrace your blessings. Make today worth remembering. And to quote one of my very favorite movies, Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium, we must face tomorrow, whatever it may hold, with determination, joy, and bravery. Your life is an occasion. rise to it.
$525,600 minutes, 525,000 moments, oh dear. 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year? In daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee, in inches, in miles, in laughter, in strife. In 525,600 minutes.